Hello everyone, this is Sam Aunai. My dissertation analysis is titled Does Bureaucracy Move the Needle on Trust? This is by Louis Jude Fusia, who recently just completed his PhD. He defended this dissertation last year. The background of this dissertation is based on the assumption that attitudes towards government, including the perceptions, are shaped and largely based on the experiences with or the attitudes towards those administrative institutions. There's also an assumption that bureaucracy moves the needle on trust. There are often calls to reform the bureaucracy in order to improve trust in government. So the problem statement within this dissertation is looking at it, bureaucratic performances impacting public attitudes and trust in government. The purpose of this research was to develop a method to assess the degree to which the bureaucracy moves the needle on trust in government. The significance or the importance of this study is that from the most empirical research and studies in political science attempt to explain trust in government but fail to include consideration of the bureaucracy. This was a multi-method approach quantitative study using an survey experimental design as well as a longitudinal analysis of data over a 40-year span. There were several components within the literature review. To note some significant components is understanding attitudes. Since this dissertation is primarily looking at attitudes, how people's attitudes view the performances of the individual public agencies or institutions. And so looking at it from an attitude perspective, defining it through cognition, meaning the beliefs or the thoughts individuals might have or associated with a particular object, or the affect or the feelings or the emotions people might attach to an object, and the behavioral intent, the reactions or the intentions to act in response to an object. The partisan polarization, where sometimes mass polarization affect the feelings towards people of another party based on, rather than looking at it from the cognitive perspective of ideology. And then attitudes towards an object are formed on the basis of experiences with that particular object alone. And that's important to understand these things because it helps to understand how attitudes towards government are based on experiences people might have on government and the perceptions about their performances, which directly speaks to this dissertation and how direct experiences with institutions of government will affect attitudes towards trust in those institutions. There are several limitations within the dissertation. To note a couple, within a survey experiment itself, there is a suggestion that a replication of the findings of this experiment would provide additional confidence in the findings itself. And from the longitudinal analysis, the limitations were of course based on the fact that the analysis was based on yearly data as opposed to getting the data quarterly. And those were just a few of the limitations, as well as collectively the notion that negative performance on a bureaucracy affect individual attitudes, but collective attitudes appear favorable to the bureaucracy. That itself appears to be inconsistent with the results without any clear explanation. And so there's just limitation there. The quickest example could be that we as members of the public, we may like our member of Congress, but we may not necessarily like Congress as a whole. Same concept here within this notion as regards to the bureaucracy. The main research question within the survey experiment is that Q about performance of one federal agency increases or decreases trust in government. The survey questions were analyzed using the ANOVA and regression tables. Several hypotheses. Some of the key ones include the fact that a Q about high performance will increase trust, while a Q about low performance will decrease trust. Low performance Q will have a larger effect on trust than high performance Q. And then hypothesis 3 looks at it, the saliency of performance and how they impact trust. And then hypothesis 4 is looking at the performance as well as partisan alignment. The findings for hypothesis 1, it supports the hypothesis that a Q about high performance will increase trust in government, and this largely driven by those respondents who identify themselves as Democrats. Hypothesis 2, looking at the asymmetry effect of performance, it does support the hypothesis, here largely driven by those who identify themselves as Republicans. Hypothesis 3 and 4, while there is some general understanding about how they support the generalness of the hypothesis in moving the needle on trust, the results were not statistically significant within the findings. The survey experiment used the Amazon's Mechanical Turk, or the MTurk. In this platform, typically connects the requester of the survey to those who are willing to perform the task for a small fee. In this case, the subjects in this survey experiment were offered $1 to complete the survey, and over 3,000 surveys were collected, and information and questions were asked based on individual experiences people had with 6 federal agencies as listed: EPA, Social Security, the Consumer Product, as well as Department of Commerce and Transportation, and the FCC. The longitudinal analysis, the main research question is, does bureaucracy approval affect trust in government? The time frame is over a 40-year span, aggregate collection of public opinion that was analyzed. And so there are several hypotheses. Some of the key ones include short-term effect of aggregate attitudes towards the bureaucracy on trust in government, and the magnitude of this effect on trust compared to other political actors or institutions. The findings, the bureaucratic approval is positive and statistically significant. Bureaucratic approval does affect trust in government in the short term, and sometimes even greater than that of the president, and comparable to Congress and the Supreme Court. Key summary results from this rotation so far are that negative performance Q decreases trust. Attitudes towards the bureaucracy do affect trust in government in the short term. Key lessons learned: the bureaucracy does move the needle on trust in government. Any reform to improve performance is unlikely to generate trust. However, if reforms fail to increase performance, it is unlikely to decrease trust. These 2 points make it looking at it from any more reforms to try and improve performance, it's unlikely to increase trust than what it already experiences. And then the other lesson learned here is that bureaucracy is unaccounted for in most empirical analysis and studies. Contribution to the body of language. This dissertation adds to the knowledge that the bureaucracy as a function of understanding trust in government, and that the bureaucracy is largely missing from most empirical studies and analysis, perhaps an underdeveloped view. This is because most political scientists merely look at the bureaucracy as a part of the executive branch, but primarily from the angle of the president, the office of the president, and not necessarily the myriad of agencies that make up the bureaucracy, as well as sometimes public administration scholars fail to appreciate the role politics and political institutions play in shaping managerial and or public administration operations within government. There are ample opportunities for further research and studies, especially looking at whether agency saliency and partisanship do affect performance trust relationship, and whether further examination of both the micro and macro level determinants of attitudes towards government. Connecting this dissertation to our study so far, this quarter, one of our texts notes the following: As we view bureaucratic accountability and performance from all these perspectives, it will become apparent that the executive branch is a dynamic collection of organizations that perform, in some instances better than others, innumerable vital functions in and to the American political system. Therefore, this dissertation affirms this notion by indicating that the bureaucracy does move the needle on trust by the functions that it performs. And this pretty much ends my dissertation analysis. I look forward to your comments, questions, and views. Thank you.